Hello and welcome to Chaos Dwarf Radio, the Brazen broadcast brought to your ears from our microphones through the magic of a well-aimed arse cannon. My name is Oxymandaeus, and with me today I have Reaver.
Hi there.
Michael X.
Hey, what's up?
And Chitskoy.
Hi, guys.
Now, we're not wholly sure if today's episode is going to be a shorter episode or a longer episode than last time, because we've decided to divide up some topics that we'd planned for episode 2. So we're going to have today's episode 2, but we're also going to be having a spin-off third episode, which is going to be a Golden Hat special coming out pretty soon as well. So how long this episode is kind of depends really on how much we can talk. And if episode 1's anything to go by, I reckon we could talk the hind legs off a great Taurus between us, couldn't we?
Should work.
Should be fine. Now, our main topics today, we're going to have two main discussions. One of them is going to be a range review. Michael X is going to be talking us through Lost Kingdom miniatures and some of the highlights of their Chaos Dwarf range. And we're also going to be having a discussion about hobgoblins. You know, what are they? Do we need them? Why are they so bloody expensive on the second-hand market? And maybe what we can do as hobbyists in order to get some decent hobgoblin proxies in our armies. Well, first of all, maybe we should have a little catch-up, gents. What have we all been up to since our listeners heard from us last? Who wants to kick off?
I can have a go.
Go for it, Michael.
Since last time, I think I just gave myself a massive deadline because I planned a battle in 3 weeks from now. So I still have a whole... I'm looking at them right now. 36 warriors or blunderbuss warriors and 11 bull centaurs to paint. So that's what I've been up to. But the sad thing is I've been pretty distracted by other stuff that our Italian friend on the Discord has been showing stuff about, namely Gaslands. So
yeah,
mostly that. It's really nice to have something completely different to paint, but bad timing.
Yeah.
Well, and everything else is pretty much the same every day. Working from home. Nothing new there.
So if these blunderbuss models aren't done on time, Michael, it's Eddie on the forum we have to blame directly. Yeah, is that right?
Yeah, all of those. I have to
Okay.
spam his Facebook or something, or his Instagram.
Some of that Gasland stuff is very impressive. It's some really great weathering techniques you've been using, Michael.
And they're so simple. I mean, the thing is, I haven't weathered much because mostly it's rust techniques that I've been using on these things. But it's ridiculous. I mean, the containers I painted, you probably saw them. They're like 4 hours painting, mostly rattle can and a bit of spray paint with the airbrush. I don't think I even used an actual brush on them, since it's ridiculous, and it's all 3D printed.
Yeah, seeing what you guys have been cranking out, I ended up sorting out my trash box, which has just been overflowing recently. But I've got a few large containers I've been just sifting through. It's a very dangerous proposition seeing all that stuff flying across the forum. It definitely makes me want to drop everything I'm doing and pick it up. So I see how you've been distracted by it.
Yeah, it's addictive.
Awesome. Reaver, mate, what have you been up to hobby-wise lately?
As usual, real mixed bag. Finished up some blunderbuss warriors from Russian Alternative not too long ago. I believe that was right after our last episode, actually. So those are a blast. It was not too large of a unit, but I buffeted out the 10 models that come in the kit with some troop filler and some custom builds on it. So I finished that up. Been pretty distracted by a couple of Thousand Sun sorcerers recently. So those took way too much time, all things said, but just so many colors on those guys. It's a lot of fun to work with, but just takes time.
Yeah, those Thousand Suns look beautiful though, mate. I saw the most recent one you posted in your Battle Against the Grey thread you have on a forum. Like beautiful work, mate. Really nicely done.
Yeah, thank you. That's my favorite one by far. That's like I got that kit, and it's got some great bits in it. Couple of issues with how the kit kind of directs you toward assembling them in certain configurations, but nothing you can't overcome. So I was got the kit and you just see all this like Thoth themed like Egypty bits. I was like, well, those all need to live on the same model. There's really no way around it. So that was the first one that I built up, was that one that I painted most recently. But yeah, those are fun. Other than that, just today actually I was in the airbrush booth doing probably like 40 or 50 miniatures for Bloodborne, the board game. So that's about to begin. Pretty much starting with the player characters, so that when people pick up the board game, they at least can play with somebody that's painted. So that's my start. Yeah, it's an undertaking for sure, but I've been playing the game a couple times in person, a couple times on Tabletop Simulator. So been really enjoying it. Cooperative, more of like a action adventure kind of crawler game, little hero questy, but no dice, which is the weirdest part about it. But
Oh, no dice. What are the mechanics? Is it card based or something?
yeah, so you have a deck of 12 cards, and the whole mechanic of like leveling up, that's very like Soulsian, is taking cards out of that deck and replacing them with better ones. So you have this deck of 12 cards and you have 3 in your hand, and you can only do so many actions during your turn. So when you go to play your card, then the enemy will react to what you do. So yeah, you're not like saying, I need a 4-up to damage this person. It's, I am committing to doing this thing. What will the enemy do? And then you resolve the result. So it's very card driven.
Interesting. Very different. I mean, for people that have obviously come from Warhammer backgrounds, I'm just, knowing that when I say I'm going to do something, I'm actually going to do it is a luxury.
Would you say the minis are more Chaos Dwarf color scheme or Tzeentch color scheme, given how massively contrasting your two chosen palettes usually are?
I think they'll be very gray, so I think they'll end up closer to the dark Chaos Dwarf color palette. I'm probably not going to be using metals though, so that'll be the main difference against my Chaos Dwarfs, which use piles of true metal. But yeah, mostly darker and grittier. Lots of reds, so that'll be more similar to Chaos Dwarfs than the Thousand Sun Sorcerers, for sure.
When you say no metal, do you mean non-metallic metal, or no metal at all?
There's really very little metal. There will be a couple of instances where I'm gonna have my hand at non-metallic, but it's really quite minimal on the amount of actual like metal that's showing. I might use like a tiny bit of true metal in like filigree or something like that, but yeah, mostly try and avoid it if I can.
That's so interesting. I guess it's mostly what, cloth and guns.
Yeah, cloth and guns, and for the most part, I'm going to treat the guns pretty like gritty, not like a shiny metallic barrel. So and then all the enemies and stuff, they almost have no metal. They're all just kind of like wolves and beasts and stuff like that. So not really a whole lot of metal needed in general.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing the results of that, mate. The little bits you've shown already with the cool basing and stuff you've been doing, those Bloodborne minis. Yeah.
Hopefully soon.
Chits, what have you been up to, mate?
Well, I think everyone on the forum knows, unfortunately for me right now, the hobby is confined to fiction and collecting. So for me, hobby news is all about the things I've been buying, the things I've been writing. I think I may have mentioned it to a couple of people around. I sold my first piece of fiction to the Warzone Eternal project, which you guys can find on Facebook if you're interested. They're bringing back that classic 90s heroic scale style stuff, and I think the minis and the Kickstarter are going to go up soon. I've also been working, of course, on Among the Wicked Darwi, mostly in the background, but you've got some green skin and hobgoblin themed passages coming up for that. And then at the same time, hilariously, given the topic that we've got this week, I've also been rounding out my collection of vintage 90s hobgoblin miniatures. So I would say about a third of the way through the range when we did the last podcast, but since then I've made some good purchases, some late night purchases that were probably a bit spurious, some anger driven purchases because someone was determined to beat me in an auction, and I've brought quite a lot of kind of 80s era goblins, but more importantly those 93 big hat hobgoblin axemen and wolf riders into my collection, which is a really nice thing although, it's very likely I'm never going to finish it. The other thing that I've been doing really is helping other people to find the miniatures they're looking for, which is always very fun. And the last thing I'll say is that I finished my collection of the Asgore era Hellsmiths just this week. I got the last one out of the 6 that were released.
Nice. I think you shared a picture of that. That was the Warhammer World Forge World store one, wasn't it? The one who looks like a proper big hat, doesn't he?
Yeah, new in box, which is always a reassuring thing when you're buying resin.
Absolutely. Yeah, nice one. What a good find, mate.
It didn't cost me an arm and a leg. It may have cost me a toe or two. But, ultimately, that's the joy of vintage collecting, right? Is you very much have to get lucky. And I think with that one being the last piece, it's always nice finishing a collection as well.
Lovely. And I think that people approach the collection of Chaos Dwarfs in very different ways. I think sometimes people are going for that. I'm in it to collect those exact miniatures. I don't really care about duplicates and stuff like that too much. I just want I want one of everything. I think you're very much into that, aren't you, Chits? Where I think other people are more like, how can I try to emulate the old stuff by using what's available today, sort of thing as well. It's just different ways of approaching it, really. And I think it's nice that our forum has always been a place for the people that are out there to collect all the old miniatures, as well as the people that are out there to create new stuff that feels like the old miniatures. It's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with that. I also think that, especially when it comes to that 90s stuff, I definitely want one of everything. That's very much my objective. I don't, therefore, need dupes of everything to fill out regiments. Which is a relief, because the prices we're going to talk about for the Hobgoblins later make that financially untenable. So it's something where someday I'll put these guys on a table together with the stuff that I've got from 3D printed ranges, the stuff that I've got from small shops, the stuff that I've got from Mantic and things like that. And they will be a diverse bunch, but they'll come together in their own way, I'm sure.
Nice one. And as for myself, the stuff that I've been working on lately, I haven't been painting a ton of miniatures lately. I go through fits and starts with miniatures. Sometimes I'll paint, 50 miniatures in a month, and other times I'll paint absolutely zero. And it's been a close to 0 month actually for me. I've been working really hard on getting this gaming room finished. I'm currently sat in it. I'm sat on the half of the gaming room that has a floor, which tells you that I'm getting close. It's not quite done yet. So that's what I've been really, really focusing my energy on, is just getting this room finished, because the date, hopefully, when we can start rolling dice again in Britain, is approaching quite quickly, and I would like to have a nice space where I can do that with my mates again. But that just means a few little bits have to be done. I did paint one miniature recently, actually. I painted and I feel dirty even saying it, guys. I painted an elf. I know. I did bad and I feel bad, but it was.
You kept that quiet.
Oh, I know. Yeah. You notice I didn't share that one on the forum, did I? No. The reason is that my partner, and she's never really been into gaming as such. She doesn't mind board games and that, but she's never been into like war gaming or anything like that. A friend of hers from work has really, really gotten into Dungeons and Dragons during lockdown. She's been playing it on, I think it's like the Roll20 site. She's doing like a remote Dungeons and Dragons, and this girl's really, really got into DMing. And she said, "Would you like to join in a game of Dungeons and Dragons?" And my partner was like, "Yeah, sure, go for it." And then she said, "Do you think your partner might be into something like that?" And she was like, "I think he might bite your hand off." So it's interesting, really. We're now building up for a Dungeons and Dragons one shot, which might evolve into a campaign depending on how much people like or hate it. Because apart from myself and the Dungeon Master, out of the 5 or 6 people that are taking part, nobody else has ever done a tabletop RPG before. So it's going to be an interesting one. It's basically like a group of newbies and me. Although I say I'm not a newbie. I've played Dungeons and Dragons a lot, but it's all been 3rd edition, and it's been Pathfinder, the kind of spin-off of 3rd edition, and these guys are playing 5th edition. So I'm sure the differences will only be nuanced, but it will probably be enough that I will think I know what I'm doing when I don't actually know what I'm doing. It'd almost be better off not knowing. Do you know what I mean?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't think it will be shocking.
Yeah, you think it will work all right? Yeah.
Well, I haven't played Pathfinder a lot, but 5th edition is pretty. Well, it's a nice game. It's not that hard. It's not really that. Well, for me at least, it's not that far from 4th edition anyway.
Nice.
I'd also suspect a new DM tends to be a very story-driven DM, right? And from that perspective, I think it's very likely that the game mechanics are not going to kind of get in the way of any group that is new to the terrain in the way that yours is.
Yeah, that would be nice, to be honest, because that's the one thing with RPGs, isn't it? When you learn how to role play, you can port that over to any system. And actually, even when I played Pathfinder before Corona and stuff, I was playing I was 2 years into a Pathfinder campaign, which we're hopefully going to pick up again after all this is done. But even that, I always pick a fighter, because it's like, look, I don't really care about spells and skills too much. Just point me in the direction of what I need to hit, and I'll hit it during the combat phase. And then in the role-playing phase, I can really get into it. I mean, that's the side of RPG that I really like anyways, is that kind of escapism and that sort of playing a character. Anyway, that's why I ended up painting an elf, because my other half decided that she wanted to be a wood elf druid, of all things. And I searched high and low in my miniatures collection. I had nothing of that description, which I think just goes to show that I've made good life choices. So I ended up 3D printing a wood elf and painting up for. I might share on the discourse at some point. I probably won't. I think if I do, Eddie will bully me, so I won't.
It probably will.
We're glad you made it out the other end of that. Hopefully it doesn't stick around any more than that.
Yeah, that's it, Reva. If you see me in a couple of weeks going, yeah, I've picked up a box of wood elves, have a word with me, mate. Take me to the side and, intervene, please. Right, gents, I think we should probably get on to our topics for the day. The first thing we're going to be talking about is going to be a miniature range review. And this is one of these ranges of Chaos Dwarfs that just were not around when I was first getting back into Chaos Dwarfs and Big Hats and stuff like that. It seems that the market in recent years, and literally the last 3 or 4 years, has just absolutely exploded with options for people who want to collect Chaos Dwarfs in a way that just was not there before. And this company, Lost Kingdom Miniatures, has been one of the companies at the forefront of that, kind of smashing out some absolutely beautiful Chaos Dwarf sculpts. But I don't want to talk about it too much, because Michael, you're going to be kind of leading us a little bit through this. So Michael, do you want to talk to us a little bit about Lost Kingdom Miniatures and some of their are they Chaos Dwarfs? Are they Magmorum Dwarves or something? What are they?
Yes, Magmorum Dwarves, exactly. Well, my first introduction to them was with their Kickstarter somewhere, I don't know exactly when, but I believe mid 2020. And it was I got to know them from their Lizardman models, which is it's my biggest painted army. Let's put it like that. My main army. And even though I didn't really plan on printing more, because I just finished painting them all, I still love them so much that I wanted to have the option to print them and add to them. But the other half of the Kickstarter, it was a 2-part. One part was for all the Lizardman models, and the other part was for the dwarves, the Magmorum dwarves. And well, my first instinct was I have to have those, because I always wanted to print a Chaos Dwarf army, or have a Chaos Dwarf army. And that's how I got to know them. Then I found out they also have a Patreon, which was even better, because, well, you get a new set of models each month. So I subscribed to their Patreon, I think somewhere in May last year, something like that. And I selected some of those Patreon releases, or some models from 2 releases that I want to discuss, because I think they're just beautiful. And I was a bit in between, should I go for characters and war machines and stuff like that, the fancy stuff, or more infantry and stuff like that. But in the end, I chose to go for infantry, because, well, that's the grunt of the army, so to speak. And I think more people will be interested in that than in the Summer 2 special characters.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for the listeners at home, this might be hard to imagine. So, if someone would be interested in images, I think we can make some thread on the Discourse or something where we can post these. Jack, that might be a good idea for the future.
Yeah. What we
So-
can do is we can make a little forum section and just say, images from episode 2 of the Brazen broadcast or whatever. And what we can do is we can link that at the bottom of our show, so that when listeners, if they want to look at the pictures as we discuss them, those pictures can be up there then.
I think that's a good idea because, well, we're talking about pictures a lot, and context is everything. Right. So the first I want to talk to you guys about, it's the set of warriors. I painted a unit 2 weeks ago of these guys, and I'm painting another one in about a month probably. And the reason I like these is because they have everything. They have big heads, they have helmets, they have beards, and they have beautiful shields. I'll upload those in a few minutes. But for me, these are they are like, to me, the more modern version of the original Chaos Dwarf. Well, not original, third edition Chaos Dwarfs. That's how I imagine them to be, more modern looking. I don't know what you guys think of those.
I completely agree, mate. I look at the infantry, and especially the way that individual dwarfs are done in Lost Kingdom, and I think this is the best rendition of Grimdark big hats that we have on the field at the moment, right? And you see, like, Russian Alternative are in a similar space, but Lost Kingdom has really amped up the Grimdark, and I think they've done it in a way where the hats aren't silly. The horns are clearly, they're individual, but they're all clearly like a running motif, whether your dwarf's got a head on or not. And I think that they are the top of the line rendition for if you want big hats that look serious.
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing, they look like dwarves and they look very ominous. They look scary for me. I mean, imagine walking on the street and bumping into one of those guys.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Oh, and not to move on the topic at all, but one of the things we probably won't talk about today is that, like, the Lost Kingdom range, it involves the impaled prisoners. They've got like a range of prisoners who are just on stakes or have been flayed, and these are the Chaos Dwarfs that I am writing about, right? When I write Among the Wicked Darwi, these are scary dudes. You would not want to fall into their clutches.
Exactly. I think the impaled warriors were part of the Kickstarter, actually.
Yeah, they definitely were. I was on that Kickstarter mostly for the FDM terrain aspect of it, but definitely looking forward to getting into all the SLA bits that they included, mostly as stretch goals, I think, because the main part of that Kickstarter was mostly FDM. But then when they got into the stretch goals, they were just churning out all these cool SLA models, which is just awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Have you ever looked at the size of the Magmorum Dwarf walls and towers at 100%?
I haven't printed any of them, but I've definitely played around with them in in 3D space on the computer, and yeah, I've been trying to figure out some good ways to use them for something more nautical. Big surprise there.
Well, I'm looking at one of the towers now, and it's 5 stories, and it's about guesstimate about 2.5 times the height of the normal plastic Warhammer siege castle.
Oof.
The tower. It's
massive.
Also, print times are insane. I think I printed about a week for one tower, so not going to do that again. I decided that if I'm going to print them again, I'm going to probably downscale them. At least 70 to 70 or 60% of the original size.
Michael, something I really, really like about the miniatures you've just shared there. You've sent us a picture of 2 ranks of Lost Kingdom Chaos Dwarf warriors. The first rank are using axes, which is that classic dwarf weapon. But it's that second rank behind where they have pole arms, kind of like curved spears and kind of like those sorts of weapons. That's something that I am really, really into. I think Chaos Dwarfs are a historically inspired army, and the historical period they are inspired by, ancient Babylon and stuff, is in antiquity. And in those days, spear was the king of the battlefield. It's not as romanticized perhaps as swords and axes and things like that, but spears were used so heavily in ancient warfare. And I think that's something that maybe if I were to go back in time and to have a look at the old 1990s big hats again, is I'd be pushing for spears on them, because I think it's a weapon that just seems to fit the aesthetic of that kind of ancient Near Eastern soldier an awful lot more than an axe does.
Also, when you think about a dwarf, they're mostly pretty, what's the word? Drilled into a unit. I can't think of
disciplined.
the correct word. Disciplined, that's what I'm looking for. So if you think of a tight, disciplined unit, spears make much more sense than an axe, especially for second and third ranks.
And especially for small dudes fighting bigger dudes, right? Like it would be almost the size of a pike to a dwarf. I got to agree with Oxy there. I also think one of the best things about Lost Kingdom, this is quite difficult. I'm going to try and express this as succinctly as I can. There's kind of a bit of an identity crisis in post-GW Chaos Dwarf ranges, where it's like, are these dwarves who've gone insane, or are these dwarves who worship an evil god? And some of the dwarves who've gone insane have got weapons that are quite rusty or damaged. And I'm thinking of people like Mom Miniatures and things like that, where they have these weapons and armor that are quite battered. And that doesn't say what I do as a dwarf is I spend all my time in the forge and I'm an amazing artisan. I'm just an evil artisan. And what I really like about the Lost Kingdom infantry is those shields that you're showing us and those pole arms. They're all evil, but they're all also clearly works of great craft and skill, which is what I associate with, especially Warhammer dwarves.
Exactly. That's the reason I wanted to share the shields with you guys, because they are, for me, the absolute highlight of these models. They are stunning. I like a lot of shields designs, but these are just, well, perfect. I couldn't do it better. I love these shields.
Yeah, I think you sent those to me, pictures of them, Michael, not long ago, because I was looking for shield inspiration. And I remember all of these designs. They're incredible, really, and especially for a rank and file unit. It just, for the look of the unit, for me, that's such an important thing to have. A shield that's not just like, it's a blank space that's taken up most of the visual interest across the whole unit. But these definitely don't fall into that. These are, like you said, artisanship is what they really seem like.
Any blacksmith would be proud to produce a shield looking at that like that. I know I would.
I was gonna say, don't we have to defer to you on that? You're the blacksmith.
Well, yeah, I don't think I could make that. Not even if I had 1,000,000 years. But still, I would be proud to. So not to linger too long, because I still have a few units left. Skipping to the latest release, that they introduced us to Dead Guard, and they look more like the Forge World dwarves, or at least that's the vibe I got. And I love their blunderbuss units. Almost made me regret printing the Titan Forge units, but I still really like those, so I'll just have a lot of blunderbuss units in the end. No hate.
That's the answer, isn't it, mate? Yeah, get both.
Exactly. Well, my backlog is pretty sizable, so I might end up with a 6K army with a lot of duplicate units, but who cares? I really like the helmets of these guys and the sawed-off horns on their head. For me, it looks really evil. It's just looking at the mask is, it's terrifying. If you see a unit of faceless, masked, hornless, in this case, dwarfs, with absolutely spiky blunderbuss weapons, they are probably the next unit I'm going to print.
I think actually these are doing something quite impressive, because I believe in last episode we were talking a little bit about how Chaos Dwarfs in the old 1990s range had blunderbusses, and then the decision was made in the Forge World range to change them to those fire glaives. And we had a bit of a laugh, didn't we, about how a blunderbuss isn't a super high-tech weapon for a super high-tech race like the Chaos Dwarves. But looking at these guys, these blunderbusses to me look like handheld demon cannons. They look like hell cannons that you could hold. Do you know what I mean? I'm not getting a low-tech vibe from these. I'm actually getting quite the opposite. These to me look like they could almost be like demon-infused sort of weapons.
I'd agree with that, Oxy. One of the things I think is best about these guys is they've got this, like, they're clearly Infernal Guard, right? Because they've clearly had their horns chopped off and then they've been sealed into some armor. And unlike vanilla Infernal Guard, they've got skull helms, which I think adds to the vibe, the aesthetic, that these are distinctively different troops from the rest of the group. These are, you know, prisoners fundamentally. These are slave soldiers, even amongst the troops. And in that context, you kind of start to see from a lore perspective, well, why do they have this short range blunderbuss weapon? Well, it's very damaging. You couldn't give it to a greenskin. You wouldn't want to hold it yourself because you have to get right up close to the enemy. So they've got massive bayonets, heavy armor. They go right up in front of the enemy and then they fire. And I just think it's like one of those units where I'm like, I get it now. I get why they use blunderbusses, because these are their expendable shock troops who've had their horns pulled off and sealed into their armor. So of course they've got high risk, high reward weapons.
That's a very good description.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this is one of the first Lost Kingdom units that I had ever seen. This was before they ran that Kickstarter. But back then they had what I would say is the equivalent of a crossbow looking feature. I'm not sure if Michael, if you have any of those, but it was the masked dudes, but with this very similar posing, just with a different weapon. So I'm glad to see that they've kind of come full circle and brought more of a traditional looking, well, say traditional, but a weapon that we're more used to seeing on Infernal Guard.
I had to make the connection actually, but now that you mention it, I printed two of the crossbow dudes for the, I don't know which one of the golden heads a while back, and I didn't really connect those two, but they look very similar indeed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming they probably reposed and whatnot, but that, at least like in terms of the aesthetic of the face and the general look of it, they seem to be pretty similar. I remember, like, back when I first started Chaos Dwarfs, I was, you know, sitting there looking at Forge World, and I was also had Lost Kingdom open. And this was when they still sold, you know, direct resin copies instead of just you know, files for 3D printing. So this was pretty early on in their web store, and these were just perpetually out of stock. So I never ended up pulling the trigger, but I was very close to just going this direction from the very beginning before I went and made some War Machine purchases on Forge World.
I'd say two things, Reva, that you've inspired me to realize. I think, even though these aren't actually my favorite miniatures in the range, I think if I wanted to sell someone on Chaos Dwarfs, I think I'd show them this. I think these minis are a manifesto in a nutshell, really quickly and immediately, to show you what this is all about. And I also think this is the one regiment that I can imagine like a Warriors of Chaos player buying and being like, if I have one unit of Chaos Dwarfs in my overall group, other than the lads who run my hell cannons, it would probably be these scary skull helmed, because that's a motif that they usually keep back for necromancy, right? And in reality, that's squandered. These guys have got a real chaos appeal, and I can imagine that they would have been sold out regularly back when they were sold as miniatures, because I just think that they go a bit beyond the Mesopotamian thing, and I think they've got more appeal as a result.
Well, I mean, that must be true, Chits, because I'm looking at them now with thinking of my new Chaos Dwarf army, which is very much more Chaos Warrior influenced. My new Chaos Dwarf army are like Chaos Dwarf barbarians, and I'm looking at these guys and I'm thinking they would fit in my Chaos Dwarf army just as well as they'd fit in a very Mesopotamian themed one. And the fact that, as you've said already, they've got these kind of motifs that suggest that they are incarcerated, like they've got the skull face plates on, their horns have been shaved off and stuff. Have you noticed their beards aren't braided like the other Chaos Dwarfs as well? It's just another little nod towards these guys not being very well looked after, isn't it? I think they'd fit in my army pretty bloody well. I'm quite tempted.
I think the straight beards isn't something that I'd necessarily picked up on, but you're right. Well, like I'm saying at the beginning, this is a very lawful miniature in and of itself. If you hold it, then you're inherently able to be like, who is this fella? He's clearly part of a whole thing. He's clearly none of this design or composition is by accident or for flair or for style. These are up close, ranged weapons. These are disgraced characters. And that's not an amount of character you normally see in a line infantry sculpt. You know what I mean? You might see that on like an army standard bearer or a hero, but you're not seeing that on your line infantry from other suppliers.
Yeah, I think that's something very typical of Lost Kingdom. They seem to be to that level of detail for every single thing they crank out, whether it be, down to those humans on spikes, like you mentioned from the Kickstarter, or one rank and file dude. They have that quality is there.
Yeah, they definitely look at the lore of the unit they're designing, which is nice because what I like about these models is, as you said, Chits, if you know the history of Infernal Guard, you see all these details, which confirms, okay, that's the Infernal Guard. But if you don't know any of this and you look at them, well, they'd still have a huge appeal to any Chaos Dwarf player, as you said, because they just look evil and chaosy and, well, armored as whole Chaos armies usually are. So it's just a beautiful unit to me.
Yeah, Michael, I'd be interested to hear, since you have these models, you've printed them already? Is that correct?
Nope.
Not yet? Okay.
They are the next.
Yeah, I'll be interested to hear how that goes. My one caveat to this, kind of praise that we've been funneling along to this unit is just that I'd like to see some poses with the guns pointed more straightforward. And I'm kind of curious as to whether or not this is an artifact of of these being previously holding crossbows. But seeing I love the back rank. Seeing the front rank, I think I'd like a little bit more like direct firing. And I'd just be interested to hear about the models and like posability and things like that, because it could just be how they're, showing us these renders, and something that you could easily overcome when you, have the model in hand.
I don't think you can really repose them without significant either digital or physical, well, let's say green stuffing. This is purely based on the Titan Forge blunderbuss models I printed. Because they also have the same components, body with the head stuck to it, and then left arm, right arm, and the separate gun. And well, they were quite complex to glue together because if you get the angle of one arm a tiny bit off, then the rest doesn't really fit beautifully anymore. I'm assuming the same will be true for these guys, looking at the renders. I haven't looked at the 3D files much, so I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure you won't be able to point them forward. Another thing is that I assume they were more trying to get the look of a unit marching than a unit firing, which is why they probably not pointed forward.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. I definitely usually I'm a unit variety person, as opposed to I want a nice, everybody looking very ranked and filed. I'm definitely much more of a diorama in a unit kind of person. So that's pretty much my opinion. But yeah, I could definitely see how with that back arm kind of reaching more around the gun instead of more, holstering that right up against the shoulder. That definitely seems to be more like a marching unit.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that you won't be able to easily convert these to shooting gun at the shoulder type units or models. But that's Ozymandias his specialty now.
Hardly a specialty, mate. The mesh mixing that I've been doing has been dipping my toes in the paddling pool. That is 3D modeling. Do you know what I mean? 3D modeling's an ocean. I'm in the shallow end.
Yeah.
I feel like I might have dumped you in it a bit on the Discord when I said that you were getting your printer up and running and you were willing to print for other people.
I think you're dropping me in it even more by saying that on a public broadcast. If anyone asks, I haven't got a 3D. No, I'm joking. I'm happy to help out, CDO aficionados, assuming they're local and don't mind paying for the resources. That doesn't bother me at all. As like I was saying on Discord the other day, CDO family, innit? Do you know what I mean? We all look out for each other. We're all collecting a very hard to collect faction. So if there's a way of getting miniatures into somebody else's collection, absolutely, I'll help out where I can.
Well, I've said it before, and I probably will say it again a lot of times, but I'm amazed at how freely this community wants to help other guys on the forum. It's absolutely terrific. Anyway, I have one more infantry unit and then 2 more other units, so I'll just throw in some pictures now. Now these guys, they kind of like stumped me because I wouldn't really know what to use them for. They're called Elite Guard by Lost Kingdom, and they just look like, well, Chaos Dwarf ninjas or samurai. They're very dynamic looking units, but I have no idea what I would use these as, for what I would proxy those. But those dual-handed weapons, they just look very intimidating. I really like that they all still share the same style, the same boots, the same chainmail and plate mail skirt, like all the other ranges all the other units I've just shown. It's a really consistent feel.
Definitely. You were saying about what you could use these for. I think we'll get onto kind of what these guys look like and stuff, and our thoughts on that in a sec. But just as to what you could use them for, I would lean towards maybe Immortal Guard with great weapons.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because like there's definitely several in there that they're holding a longer handled blade, almost like a Guandao type style, and but not a full host of them. So there's only so many in that unit that seem to be holding that way. And then you have a couple that are dual wielding. So that does make kind of a proxier's nightmare when you're looking at it.
It's a strange choice, really. I'm going to be completely honest, and I don't want to badmouth Lost Kingdom Miniatures because their work is absolutely beautiful. But I was extremely excited by that last unit you showed me. But this one, I don't know. There's something about it that's not clicking with me. Maybe it's that the weapons look a little bit too Far Eastern as opposed to Near Eastern. I don't know.
Let me give a try, Oxy. I think that you would like these more if they were on circular bases. There were 3 of them and they were solos rather than a regiment.
Yeah, you're probably right. This could make a cool little elite Age of Sigmar unit, but maybe it doesn't work very well as a regimented Kings of War or Fantasy Battles unit. Yeah.
Because the problem they've got as ranked infantry is that their swords are so big that the lads in the back row are going to have to chop through the lads in the front row to get anything going. And a lot of them have got these really broad moves. Like there's the fella on the far left. If you guys look at the picture, you'll know what I mean. The fella on the far left, his sword, he can only stand on the far left of that regiment, right? Because his sword is going to go into the guy next to him otherwise. And I think what these are, to me, is that they've taken something that might be a cool pose for a character and they've ranked it up. Nice motif on these. Nice little motif. They've got engravings on the swords, which again, it plays into that thing you were saying earlier, Oxy, where it's like these weapons are probably possessed and that's been carved into the detail. You don't have to paint that on yourself. You can just gently pick out those indentations and it looks like some horrible ancient language.
Yeah, definitely. The more I'm looking at them, the more I'm really studying them now. I think the ones that are really putting me off are the ones holding 2 small blades. The ones holding the larger blades, I can imagine a dwarf wielding a big 2-handed, I mean, that's some kind of sword of some description, a big 2-handed blade. I can imagine a dwarf wielding that. But a dwarf fighting with 2 knives, I associate that more with creatures that move faster, something like an elf or maybe a very well-trained human or maybe like a Slaneshi cultist or something like that. Something, or maybe even like a Skaven or something that can move very gracefully or at least very quickly. And
sneaky gits. You're looking at a sneaky git on the far right-hand side of this regiment because you're looking at a fellow with 2 knives, and that you're right. It is not a dwarven thing, but so I would call these weapons Nodachi or Nodakai, as I've heard some people pronounce them wrongly, which is a type of like massive 2-handed samurai sword, and I think many of the miniatures that we see displayed here would make great champions at the front rank of a regiment of generic big hat axemen.
Hell yes,
Mm.
absolutely.
It's just that they've made a regiment of champions.
It does look like that, and whoever positioned this rank of 10 dudes for their promotional use that's probably the only way you could arrange those 10 miniatures in a group of 5x2. That's the way it looks. And you kind of brought that up already. And interesting you mentioned the Skaven on that guy wielding 2 weapons. Those look like Clan Eshin weapons, just straight taken from an Eshin assassin, just missing a tail with a third one.
But that's exactly what Oxy's saying, is that they have gone to the Far East. To emphasize this, though, and I hope that we will move back to talk about the terrain and the scenery. Other than this unit, Lost Kingdom have rolled the furthest into the Mesopotamian aesthetic. And I agree with Oxy. I think that this unit is not particularly Mesopotamian, and that is a bit jarring.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, I'm with you, definitely. And I don't want to sound like I'm slagging this unit off too much, because they are individually beautiful sculpts, as I think we've said. They are really good. Lost Kingdom, they don't muck about. They know what they're doing. They make art. They make beautiful stuff. And if it wasn't for the fact that our other miniatures were of such a high quality, we probably wouldn't be picking this part apart as much as what we are. But I do think the conclusion to this really is what a great collection of champions to put in front of my normal units. As a unit themselves, they don't look like they fight like dwarves to me. They really don't.
I guess that's the price you pay with a very strong theme and very high quality, is that even just a slight divergence and we're all like, whoa, what's going on here? What's going on here?
Definitely.
Well, still. Right. So that's the infantry I picked, and I hope you guys like these. I love these. And the next unit I wanted to discuss, mostly because they're next on my painting list, but also because they're beautiful. And I think we scratched the surface on these in our previous podcast. It's their bull centaurs. These guys are absolutely gorgeous. The best thing I like about these is that, for me at least, some of the old, really old centaurs, they really look like the top of a Chaos Dwarf on a horse, or bull body in this case. And with these guys, they just look like a hunk of muscle with axes and beards. Also, very beautiful helmets on these guys, on some of these guys.
Yeah, these are really, really nice. They are clearly inspired, heavily inspired by the Forge World Chaos Dwarf Bull Centaur renders, aren't they? That they've been done really, really well, to the point where I'm sure, depending on how you scaled them when you print, you could stick some of these next to some of those Forge World models and make a full unit, which is just as well, because Forge World never released a full unit, did they? But the masks as well are a really lovely touch. They really are. They're almost like gladiator masks and stuff, some of those, aren't they? Yeah. And I like the fact, this is another thing with 3D printing that just gives you absolute freedom. Because the idea of what a bull centaur has changed quite a lot over the lifetime of Chaos Dwarfs. If I was playing, I don't know, 6th edition Warhammer with my Ravening Hordes list, I'd need a unit of Chaos Dwarf centaurs that fit on cavalry bases, wouldn't I? I could scale these, I could make it happen. If I'm playing 8th edition using my Forge World list, I'm going to need bull centaurs that are absolutely massive for their stat line to make sense, and for the base I need to be on. I could scale it and I could make it happen with these. It's the beauty of 3D printing, isn't it?
It is. Well, they fit nicely on a 50 by 75 millimeter base. But then again, that's a really, really big base. So, well, if they wouldn't fit on that, then it would be another issue.
No, that's a lovely paint job you've done there as well, mate. I love the dodgy eye he's got, where he's got like a scar down the eye and it's all white and stuff. That's really cool. Nice touch there, mate.
Yeah, there's also some scars on his body. Well, on the bull body. I couldn't wait painting this guy, but I mostly shared it so you can see the base size to the model size, because this one is printed. Well, they're all printed at 100%. As I've learned the hard way, Lost Kingdom models are slightly bigger than what they should be for 8th edition. So if I would print these again, I might print them a bit smaller. But on the other hand, they are in the stories and in the fluff, they're also pretty big. So maybe it's not a big issue. It's probably not a big issue, but they look huge in real life.
Interesting. I do think that the size thing is Forge World's fault, because they decided to make Bull Centaurs massive, which culminated in Shator the Executioner, who is literally gigantic. But these are, I completely agree with Oxy. These are, if you like Bull Centaur renders, you will love Bull Centaur renders wearing Chaos Warrior helms, because that's what these are. And they've executed on that concept flawlessly, which is good, because I think the thing that you guys didn't mention earlier is that the Bull Centaur render sculpts, that they were all monopose as well, and there were only about 3 of them in the Toruk. And they are very monopose in that they are not really practically able to be assembled any other way. And that means, to give the unit variety, these, 6 are a fantastic answer to that problem.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Forge World models now. Well, I don't have a scale comparison, but they look quite similar, to be honest. Maybe even a bit more buff, the Forge World ones.
I wouldn't be surprised. I have a distinct feeling that these were designed for exactly that purpose. I think they looked at the Bull Centaur render and they said, yes, I want to do that. And then they went out and they did exactly that.
The thing is, Lost Kingdom has pretty much a full Chaos Dwarf range, so they probably decided on 30mm scale for everything, because you can rescale pretty easily, which I just kind of forgot to do, which is why I have a complete unit of blunderbusses that I can't fit on bases, which still hurts. But yeah, I mean, they look well on the basis they are on. They look nice, and I don't feel that they are too big. And I think they would fit nicely with the size-wise with the Forge World models.
Yeah, to Chitz's point as well, this was, again, rewinding to when I was getting into Chaos Dwarfs. They had, at minimum, a command group option as 3. You could buy those direct from Lost Kingdom. Whereas the standard bearer, which I'm not seeing here, and by the way, Michael, so I'm not sure if you have those those sculpts as well, but there was a banner bearer, a musician, and a champion, who might be the champion here, but it might be a slightly different sculpt. But they offered that, which, presenting that, if you already had the Forge World models, then you could buy the command set. So there might be some good truth to them when they originally started selling these Chaos Dwarf models. Say, hey, this is something you could buy and augment that unit that you bought from Forge World.
Ain't it funny how the tables are turned? This company's starting off as a way to supplement your Forge World army. Now it is the army.
Yeah, that's actually pretty true. They are, well, for me at least the gold standard when you want to print an entire Chaos Dwarf army. I mean, they have pretty much everything that you need, at least for the Tom Merkham book. But I believe the range is mostly directed at either 9th Age or Warhammer Armies Project. I'm not sure, which also might influence scale. I have no idea what the scale of those armies is.
I think 9th Age just matches Warhammer, doesn't it? It is all Warhammer players, essentially, isn't it? The refugees from 8th edition, isn't it, really?
It's intended to carry forward all of the miniatures you had in 8th. So it only really changes mechanics.
So it's probably more 30mm scale.
With scale creep, yeah. I mean, it's advertised, isn't it? Warhammer as 28 heroic. Heroic means plus 2mm, I think.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Plus 2mm and big fat hands and head. Yeah. The one thing that Lost Kingdom do not do is hobgoblins. Although we're not moving on to them yet, I do think that's noteworthy. For the vast greenskin conspiracy, they have very much rolled with Asgore, which I think is a fine thing to do, and they've executed on it really, really well.
I don't know what their tactic is in regards to that. I do think they just went for, well, as you said, Asgore and nothing else. Maybe in the future we'll see some nice hobgoblins. But then on the other hand, and we're going to get into this later on, but maybe not specifically hobgoblins, but goblins in a hobgoblin-y fashion that fit with these guys, it shouldn't be too hard to find models for this. At least 3D models.
Definitely.
But I'll not go into that too much because, well, I pretty much think that Chiscory has a elaborate speech on this.
Chits, how do these guys for you kind of stack up against the historical influences? You're far better read than me in all that sort of thing. Where for me, and you might be able to school me here a touch, I see these more like Chaos Warriors than I do anything kind of particularly Near Eastern, you know? Apart from the fact they are obviously giant bulls. I mean, that's you can't get away with that. But in terms of their armor and their arms and stuff, they seem to be much more down the Chaos Warrior route. What do you make of that, pal?
Yeah, I think that's explicit. And I think there's two reasons for that, right? One is that there isn't actually a symbol for Hashut other than bull stuff of all different types. And the second, and I think the thing you're picking up on, is that they use 8-pointed stars excessively in the Lost Kingdom aesthetic, which implies that the these Magnum Horin are Chaos Undivided. Which is fine. You know, it's not like they've done any harm to the concept, and there's tons of Middle Eastern and Near Eastern stuff elsewhere in the range. But the other thing that I think you're picking up on is that they have got none or barely braided beards on these guys, right? So the bull centaurs that you're seeing here are very much more Chaos Warrior-esque, partly because of the helmets, partly because of the weapons, which are very kind of classic 90s, 2000s Chaos Warrior. And then partly because they've got giant 8-pointed stars all over them and not much else. Which I think is one of the kind of memes and influences that led me to take the bull centaurs off and give them their own society in Among the Wicked Darwi, right? Because what you're dealing with here is something where the Hashut part is just the fact that they've got massive horns. And one of the most distinctive things about these bull centaurs is that they have got these sharp pointed cattle horns that are a very bull centaur render thing. You don't see any of that on the classic big hat range, whether it's the bull centaurs or actually the chaos dwarfs themselves. That's a more modern addition.
Do you think the 8-pointed star thing might be kind of, this is out of universe, obviously, the fact that that's a symbol that's not really copyrightable, is it? The 8-pointed star, that's been around for an awful long time, whereas the symbol of Hashut is very much a Games Workshop creation. So that if a company starts plastering the symbol of Hashut on things, they can get themselves into a bit of trouble. If a company goes around sticking 8-pointed star on things, it's just a star. Do you know what I mean?
All right, you've flushed me out. There is an ancient Sumerian symbol called the Star of Ishtar, which is an 8-pointed star. However, you all know that the Chaos 8-pointed star has its roots in Michael Moorcock and his literature in the 70s, which influenced the original Warhammer. And the Star of Ishtar does not look, if you guys Google Star of Ishtar now, you'll see it, does not look much like the 8-pointed star of Chaos Undivided. But it does look like some of the other iconography that appears in the much more explicitly Near Eastern miniatures, you know, the statues, the Ishtar gates. And maybe we could go on to talk a little bit about the terrain and statuary now, Michael, if you want.
Sure. I had one more model to share, but we can make a sidestep to terrain.
Yeah, so I just sent you all a picture of one of the statues. There was a set of 3 statues. One, I believe, was released as the promo item for free on Thingiverse, if anybody's interested in that. But the blacksmith one has, and actually they probably all do, their belt buckle as something that it's in the center of an 8-pointed star, but it does look a little bit closer to what we'd canonically think of as a Chaos Dwarf symbol of Hashut, but it's not quite there. So that to Oxy's point earlier, but I haven't looked thoroughly enough to see how often that they use that symbol in their terrain, but it does give you a little bit more of a classic Chaos Dwarf symbol on it. I am seeing it in other places scrolling through the Kickstarter.
It's also on their regular warriors. If you look at the first models I shared, the first pictures, on some of their helmets, the same symbol is. You can find the same symbol on it.
Oh yeah, I can see it. It's barely perceptible. It's inside of a star, and it's like a little V sort of shape, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah. I think what you have there is something that couldn't be proven in courts to be a symbol of Hachette.
Yeah, I look. The thing about Lost Kingdom is they are a suable entity, right? They're an above board business, and not some dude working in his bedroom on Thingiverse for the love of it / trying to get a job. And nor are they, a big miniatures company that are selling their own distinctive product like Mantic. And as a result, I do think they walk that line very carefully. If you don't know the Hachette symbol, then it's the symbol of our forum. So if you go on discourse.chaosdwarfs.com, you'll see it. And if you look very closely at some of the material, you'll see a very close to, but not the same as version appears consistently on Lost Kingdom. And it's probably the only thing that Lost Kingdom does where you feel like they're pulling the punch a little bit.
Well, when I first saw it, I felt it was a nice touch because it allows for you to feel a bit more connected to, the Warhammer ranges, Games Workshop ranges, yet still not be sued, which is nice, and also still be distinctively Lost Kingdom, which is also nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at some of those bits of scenery you've sent through now as well. That's not the Hachette symbol, but it is if you squint, isn't it? That's lovely though. That's really nice as well. That's so historically inspired with that kind of very like ancient side profile style sculpting of those creatures. Those kind of I'm not sure what you'd call those, griffins or manticores or lamassus or something. Really, really beautiful image.
You see the castle wall?
Yeah,
Okay,
wow.
so if you look at the the basin where the lava flow falls into,
Yeah,
that's just under the size of my 70. Well, that's under the size of the dwarfs that are on the train on the Dreadquake mortar. So if I put one of those dwarfs next to it, I think his head would just stick out just above the basin where the lava would end it up in.
I mean, that's absolutely crazy.
I can measure it if you want, but I'd guess 40 centimeters. Yeah.
It is absolutely stunning and clearly the result of a huge amount of work by the Lost Kingdom designer or design team. I'm afraid I don't know them personally. In researching actual Babylonian murals and architecture and history.
100%.
One of the most arresting things about the range is that these miniatures clearly live in a fully realized set of terrain, which has, there are forges, there are bizarre structures, there are stairways, and there is a floating magical obelisk. There is a gate of skulls, and it is all picked out with exactly the same care and attention that's gone into the miniatures, which is fascinating. It is by far the best realized ancient Mesopotamian / Sumerian work that has been seen in miniatures design. The only thing that compares to it is Titan Forge's use of cuneiform, and they only did that on one of their miniatures.
Yeah, I think though, Chits, if you check the chat, Reaver has just posted some cuneiform tablets, mate, on a piece of scenery.
Yeah, he's the thing that's so great about what they've done is that if you go to like the British Museum or somewhere where they've got lots of ancient Sumerian statuary, you'll see that a lot of the designs here, the way that they've drawn the actual lamassus, which have, the face of a man, and the way they've drawn actual Tauruses is taken directly from that artistic style. So it's got this real world aesthetic to it that then gives it a tremendous amount of power. Because you're looking at something that real humans made thousands of years ago, but then there's extra skulls and magma spouts.
Yeah, and that's something I love. I mean, we've spoken a little bit about it before. I'm by no means an Age of Sigmar hater. No means an Age of Sigmar hater. I do like an awful lot of stuff that comes out of Age of Sigmar, but they've definitely moved away from those real world inspired cultures. And I suppose growing up with Tolkien and stuff, I love fantasy factions that you can go, oh look, they're Celts with a twist. Oh, look, they're Byzantines with a twist. And looking at these guys, this is ancient Babylonians with a twist. I mean, and it grounds it. It makes it feel a little bit more real, a little bit more believable. It's got some kind of anchor in reality, but then is allowed to shoot off in this kind of crazy, fantastical direction from there, and it just works beautifully.
I agree. They are, well, it's as Chet said, the fact that they just have so many support to their own armies, and I believe these guys are making this stuff for how long? Do you know, Reaver? 2 years or something like that?
Has to have been at least that, because I was still interested in them when they were in their early phases, and that was when I believe they were primarily casting and selling the Lizardmen faction, but they had a handful of kits available for the dwarves. Like I said, perpetually out of stock. That's why I don't have any, but that had to have been around the time I started on the forum, which I guess I could go back and look, but that's been at least 3 years, I would think.
Well, even if you give them 5 years, they also have a complete, equally supported Lizardman faction. They have growing, not as big, but still pretty sizable Tomb King faction, which I also have. I appear to be a Lost Kingdom nerd. I just realized I have pretty much everything they sold.
But you know what you've got there, Michael? You might be more of an ancient history nerd because you've got the Mesopotamian sorted, you've got your ancient Mesoamerican sorted, now you're getting your ancient Egyptian sorted. All of those factions you've mentioned are those kinds of factions that have a very real root in a real world ancient civilization. And maybe that's what Lost Kingdoms excels at best, taking those civilizations and turning them into something fantastical.
Well, possibly. They are, I forgot which one, but they are now going to release another faction soon. I think they went for, they always do a poll on their Patreon for which faction they'll do next, and I believe the Wood Elves won, unfortunately. They also had ogres, and I really, really hoped ogres, because that's that's the 1+ or something army that I might eventually buy in the future. So, well, there's hope. Maybe when they release a few Wood Elves, they might still go for ogres.
Yeah, to be fair, I'd be more interested in what they could do with ogres, especially where ogres, you think about the ogre kingdoms having that kind of Mongolian sort of thing going on.
Mhm.
I would have been very interested in how they would have built upon that. Wood elves, though, yeah, it seems, I don't know, but they might surprise me. It just seems a strange choice for what Lost Kingdom seems to be really good at.
Mm.
But who knows? They might blow us away. They might do something brilliant with it. They probably will.
Well, I think they just made a selection of all the armies that are still supported in whatever game system they're aiming for, that they still haven't produced miniatures for, and asked their community to choose which one they want, which is not a stupid thing to do if you can deliver the quality you are already making.
I believe they also did do the Kingdom of Mercia and as a Bretonnian equivalent. It was a smaller run. I don't know how much that's emerged on their Patreon or not, since I don't follow that.
Yeah,
but
it's Bretonia, but massive.
Yeah, I saw that with like big buildings on wheels and crazy stuff like that, wasn't it?
It's like siege towers, and they've just kind of amped up to 11 all of the stuff. But one of the most important things they've done is they've it's a Pegasus, but it's the size of a bus. And I think, they've given them a kind of 14th century bombard cannon rather than a trebuchet, which is a bit moving in their own direction. But I do think you're absolutely right, Oxy. I think what you're looking at here, and I would love to speak to the guys behind this group, but unfortunately they haven't gotten back to us when we've reached out to them. This is clearly people who do huge amounts of artistic and visual research into real human cultures and bring that work into their 3D designs as a starting point almost, and then embellish it from there with all of the fantastical aspects. And I think that is something really special. And we're very lucky that Chaos Dwarfs occupies that sweet spot of an underserved idea with a consistent market, and some really great creative inspiration.
Yeah, I'm gonna come out and surprise myself here, but looking at that Bretonian Kickstarter, seeing what they did with the Green Knight or the Green Knight equivalent gives me some hope that they could carry some interesting aesthetics into the Wood Elves.
I think an interesting thing as well, which maybe we could discuss, is just the nature of this business and what it kind of says about the landscape of the miniature industry as a whole. Because this is a company who began by making miniatures. You know, they were clearly 3D designing, as many miniature companies are, but their bread and butter was getting miniatures cast and getting those out to customers. And as Reva mentioned earlier, a lot of the time they were out of stock because this was a high demand product. And I mean, like I say, I don't know these guys, but I imagine compared to a behemoth like Games Workshop, this would be a very small sort of setup to try to get those physical products out. But when you start dealing with STLs, when you start dealing with 3D files, you can get those out to people and there are no overheads to that. It's just data. Once you have paid your sculptors, you know, once you've put the money into the research, the money into the creation of the thing, you can just start giving this stuff out for X amount of money. And these 3D printing Patreons like these guys are running, and so many other companies are running now, they're doing really, really well because companies can now afford to deliver dozens, scores of miniatures each month to their customers in ways that just were not physically possible to do. If you go back, 10 years, if you were trying to support a new miniature company, if they wanted to get miniatures out to you, they would have to do the research, do the design, sculpt the miniature, probably in green stuff, maybe in 3D if they were quite a forward-thinking sort of company. But either way, they would then have to go through all of the costs of casting up and tooling up and casting up and getting runs of these miniatures made. And that comes with risk, doesn't it? What if I make too many and people don't buy them? Then I'm absolutely screwed. Or what if I don't make enough and demand is higher than what I can deliver? And then I look unprofessional, like I can't get the products out to the customers and people get turned away. But now in this new age, companies can reach people with these massive, massive ranges because they only have to do half the process that they used to have to do. At the point that you've done research, sculpting, and you've now got your file, you're now done. The customer can now consume that product immediately. It's awesome, isn't it?
I mean, if you buy any unit from Games Workshop at gamesworkshop.com, not from a local shop, from the original website, as a non-UK person, it takes about 2 weeks or something for it to get here, if you're lucky. These days, it would probably double the cost of the unit. While with a company like this, you buy the models, you get them a few seconds later, depending on your download speed, and you start printing half an hour later. Well, currently probably 20 seconds later because they're all pre-supported. It's just another game. It's uncomparable to physical models for me. And also, you pay for a set of digital files and you can print how many you want of each specific model of a unit. If there's one or two you like a bit more, then you just print a bit more of those and your unit can look completely different than when you have a set of specific models in a box that you have to deal with.
And you can never get screwed over by that thing of the codex says it's really good if I have 2 plasma guns in this unit, but the box only comes with 1 plasma gun, so now I've got to buy 2 boxes.
Exactly.
That's definitely been a thing in the past, hasn't it? Whereas with 3D printing, oh great, I'll print 2 dudes with plasma guns,
Yeah, exactly. So I kept the weirdest and coolest and most controversial model last. Maybe Reaver can guess which one, but I mean, it's the Magma Tower from the February release.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Which I suppose is Magma Cannon Proxy. I mean, it's just beautiful. It's cool. It's terrifying. And it's so over the top that I don't know if I'd use it, but it looks absolutely horrifying. I mean, it's a huge monster, lava flowing out of his beak. He has two giant machine guns on his side, whatever the thing is on his back, and there's like a dwarf controlling it all. I mean, can you get more evil?
Bonkers, isn't it? I mean, I can't quite give an opinion on it yet because I'm still just trying to take it all in.
Exactly. I sent a picture of this to my gaming buddy, and he was like, "Is that a 40k Chaos Dwarf?" I was like, "Nope." And he was like, "Huh."
Yeah. It does flirt with the technology of a science fiction model, doesn't it? It definitely is. It's approaching it. I'm not sure if it crosses the line. That line's a very vague one, isn't it? Reeva, you walk that line brilliantly. You never look sci-fi with your dwarfs. It always looks steampunk, but it's a fine line to walk along, isn't it?
It is, and this one is, and I don't know which side it falls. I could very easily see myself running this as a Chaos Squats Dreadnought, just no changes. But there it is. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think I'm not sure if it came along in the same release, Michael, but one of those months included I'd say like the Fireborn equivalent, because I haven't seen a true Fireborn from them, but the more like magma golems that you could conceivably use in any different game as a Fireborn equivalent. But this one is a step above that for sure.
For me, what makes this model look a bit too 40k-ish, it's the giant, well, I call them machine guns, but I suppose they're magma cannon stuff. They look a bit too machine gunny. If they were more like the magma cannon barrel or something like that, I think it would be much, much more fantasy steampunk like. That being said, with the correct paint job, I'm pretty sure this would not look out of place in my army.
Oh, I think you could certainly make it fit in. For me, and I think I'm now digesting it now that I'm looking at the other picture. For me, it's the feed tubes that are blowing it into the 40k realm for me. If those were like direct copper piping with fitting, or any kind of material, whatever, any just hard 90s piping with fittings and valves and stuff, I think it might be a very different look. For me, those speak like Space Marine, or if you've seen a lot of the Chaos Space Marine releases in the last couple of years, especially.
Yeah, it's definitely Dark Mechanicus, isn't it?
Yep. But I'd be interested to see what it would look like if you replace some of those kind of bendy like flex tubes with something a little bit more hardline.
Well, the positive thing is that those tubes are separate pieces, so should be easy to replace. But looking at them in detail, and I'll see if I can make a screenshot of those. Hang on. There we go. I hope this works. Yeah.
Yeah. So I used to work at a pipe fabrication plant that did pipe bending as a specialty, and this blows it right into 40k for me, even seeing the picture.
Yeah.
but that's coming from a fabrication standpoint, not necessarily the
Yeah,
aesthetics.
it would be hard to fabricate that with a hammer and an anvil. Agreed. And I can speak on experience. Okay.
So I think that this is one of the only things that is not GW influenced in the range. And I think this is actually Mantic influenced for two reasons. First of all, although we think of magma and lava and volcanoes as being fundamental to the Chaos Dwarf aesthetic, they're actually not featured in the 90s range at all in any way. And the magma cannon doesn't have any actual magma. This is exactly what I was about to go on to say, Oxy. Oxy's just posted in the chat the hot take that I was about to give, which is that this is the Abyssal Dwarf Hellfane from Mantic, but with guns on the side. for two reasons. One is that Mantic gave us magma golems as a concept and kind of pushed that, and Lost Kingdom loved that because they've got these big dripping kind of magma motifs on multiple monsters. And magma's not featured on the Forge World range either, outside of the name of the magma cannon, right? So there's no lava falling from the Kadai, for instance, the GW Kadai. And this has got that same kind of four-legged aesthetic to it. And I think that's really interesting because we don't spend very much time on the forum thinking or talking about Mantic for a couple of different reasons that I won't bother going into now. But in reality, this is something that I think their take on the Abyssal Dwarfs has given us more license, and it's inspired people creatively to work with rock and to have rock and solidified and part molten rock be one of the motifs of the Chaos Dwarfs, which I think has given us this very cool miniature.
Agreed. Well, at least we agree it's very cool. Well, that's about everything I wanted to discuss with you guys today. I could do a lot more, but we'd still be here tomorrow, so let's not go that far.
Well, it's such a big range, isn't it, Michael? It's a massive range. And listeners, we do encourage you to go and check out Lost Kingdom Miniatures because, you know, we have been singing their praises for this podcast. We've had a couple of constructive criticisms on one or two things, but that's because we've purposefully picked out one or two things that we think are a little bit niche or a little bit strange within their range. But generally speaking, they are well worth checking out, especially in a post-Forge world of looking for Chaos Dwarf miniatures. These guys are probably, you know, your top tier right now in terms of looking for modern Chaos Dwarf sculpts. Yeah. All right, straight from the cutting edge of modern 3D designed Chaos Dwarfs, let's drag ourselves back about 20, 30 years to the dark and dismal days of the 1990s. And let's talk a little bit about hobgoblins, because hobgoblins are, for any fan of the Big Hat era of Chaos Dwarfs, an absolutely integral part of a Chaos Dwarf army. But they're an interesting thing because to some, hobgoblins are absolutely a part of a Chaos Dwarf army and they must be included. To others, you can quite happily make Chaos Dwarf armies with no hobgoblins involved whatsoever. They're kind of separate entities. And to an even smaller section of the audience, you know, some people do make entire hobgoblin armies. It is definitely a thing. But we're going to talk a little bit today about the hobgoblins, what they were, what they are, how to get hold of them these days, and how much that's going to cost you. And also a little bit about what you can do if you want to get some hobgoblin slaves into your Chaos Dwarf army. Chits, I think you had some words to start us off on this topic, didn't you?
Yeah, let's let me just start with a game with you guys. If you were going to build, you know, some infantry chaff, what would you think would be your target price per miniature for a chaff regiment of strength 3, toughness 3, low weapon skill guys? What would you be aiming to pay per man for a regiment like that?
Really hard question. I tend to buy second hand and I tend to buy third party. So I tend to go for cheap. So if I'm looking at filling out a 30-man unit of these things, I like to spend about 30 quid. £1 a model would be a really nice way of building up some cheap models.
Yeah. What do you guys think? Michael, Reaver?
Well, I suppose if 3D printing would be out of the question, I would be in the same corner as Ozymandias. I would not pay much more than £1, maybe £2 a model if they are, well, they'd have to be stunning to go for the £2 price range. Now, talking about 3D printing real quick, not a whole lot at all.
Right, exactly. And I think that's really important. Reaver, just for your cultural benefit, I'm going to translate some of these prices. So on eBay right now, a single hobgoblin infantryman will cost you £15 sterling. That is about $21 per man. That is not a champion, not a character, not a command section. That'll all cost you more. That's just one filler infantryman will cost you that. And that's, I'm going to try and be as polite as I can about this because we don't say certain words on Chaos Dwarf Online affiliated. That is for an unboxed miniature whose pedigree is unproven. Right? That is for a picture of a miniature on somebody's table with no base provided and maybe a weird looking foot. Now, if you wanted to buy a Hobgoblin new in box, if you wanted to buy a blister of, and this is a real listing that is really active now on eBay, say a blister of 4 original 1993 Hobgoblin archers, that would cost you £120 starting.
Yeah, that's not tenable for me. I would fall. I mean, obviously, US dollars being different, but I do fall around the 1 to 1.5 US dollar range for what I would see as a unit that probably is going to need to grow to at least 40.
Yeah, so if you wanted, there's 4 of these archers in a blister. If you wanted to field a regiment of 20 Hobgoblin archers, no command section, that'd be $825.
I can print about 4 armies for that. Maybe 5.
You could buy 2 3D printers and resin for $825 US
Seriously,
dollars. And
you could buy a printer and you could buy maybe 5-6 liters of resin, and you could print 2 or 3 armies with that price range.
Well, realistically, with that price range, I could pay for a modest-sized army and probably pay for somebody to paint it.
that's the ugliest part, I think, is that what you're paying for is fine. It's virgin 90s metal, right? But let me just step back a bit and talk to you guys a bit about why the market reached this situation. And there's one factor that I won't be referencing, right? And I think we all know what I'm talking about. Suffice to say, that factor is not particularly active in this market. Instead, this market is largely influenced by 2 things. First of all, there are not very many types of Hobgoblin from the original 93 range. There are actually 5 units and then a handful of hero sculpts. You've got Hobgoblins with axes, Hobgoblins with bows, Hobgoblin Wolf Riders with axes, and Hobgoblin Wolf Riders with bows, and then the Sneaky Gits, who've got 2 knives each. And you're looking at about 7 infantry sculpts per weapon type, 3 or 4 Wolf Rider sculpts, and 3 Sneaky Git sculpts. You then got a big boss on a wolf, a big boss on foot, 2 bosses, standard bearers, musicians, right? There's a horn blower and a drummer. And then the last thing you've got is the bolt thrower. And they're all wearing this Scythian peaked hat because of the historical influence and the fact that just like the Mesopotamians, the Scythians are like a group of people where you can steal their iconography, but they've all died out. So you're not actually going to offend anyone by creating a horrifying racial caricature. We'll come to that. And what you get for these 93 miniatures that does not affect the big hats in the same way, for whom you can get £9, £10 per sculpt for an infantryman, is a lot of Chaos Dwarf players, as Oxy was saying, do not view Hobgoblins as essential to the aesthetic because they're visually distinctive from your Chaos Dwarfs, right? They're not in armor, they're always in cloth. They're not wielding Chaos Dwarf embellished weapons, they're wielding primitive or simplistic weapons. And they never really caught on with greenskin players either, because they're not supposed to be takeable in a greenskin army. So you had a bunch of 90s Chaos Dwarf buyers who were into Chaos Dwarfs, but really the Hobgoblins were an optional extra on the side that was only buyable in metal. Whereas if you needed greenskin chaff for your army list, you would just get the plastic monopose goblins, or you'd get the plastic monopose orcs, or even you were allowed 1 regiment of black orcs in your army. And for that reason, the Hobgoblins fell between the cracks of the hobby, right? They were an idea on their own, but they couldn't stand on their own 2 feet as a distinctive army. There is a fan army book out there, but it's not particularly well edited, and there haven't been many different versions like there have been for Chaos Dwarfs. And As a result, they didn't sell very well, so they didn't cast very many of them. Most of the Hobgoblin minis came out relatively late in the life cycle because obviously they weren't the first priority if you're making a Chaos Dwarf army for the sculptors, let alone for the buyers. And as a result, you have this kind of very, very obsessive collector market chasing these miniatures and nobody else, because they are quite ugly, which is a good thing in my opinion, but they are, they're not inherent to the greenskin aesthetic. Most of their unit types can be bought for cheaper, for better sculpts of plastic goblins with more variety and more posability. And you can still buy boxes of those on eBay for, 40, 50 pounds for a regiment of 20. And that leaves us with the mass inflationary market instead. And so I thought it would be cool today if we could talk about how to make hobgoblins that fit that aesthetic or have their own distinctive aesthetic, that update the concept without breaking the bank in the way that collectors are forced to do. But I'm terrible at sculpting. I'm terrible at conversions. So I thought it would be best if I handed over this part of that conversation to you guys.
Well, I've created hobgoblins for my Age of Sigmar army. The fact that Chaos Dwarfs only hardly exist in Age of Sigmar and hobgoblins probably don't exist in Age of Sigmar. It's neither here nor there. I don't make my Age of Sigmar army to play Age of Sigmar at the end of the day. I'll make it just to make it. But the route that I went down in creating hobgoblins was with a company called EM4 Miniatures, which you may or may not have heard of. So EM4 Miniatures is an interesting little company. They sell a couple of boxed games. They sell some lead miniatures and they sell some pre-painted miniatures and dice and bits and bobs like that. Their website is old school. Like when you go onto the website, you do feel like you might have stepped back 20 years in some kind of strange realm gate. But one thing they have, which I'd seen plastered all over the internet on forums and stuff, was they have a set of orcs and a set of dwarfs in plastic, and 25mm scale, not 28mm scale, for absolutely dirt cheap. And when I say dirt cheap, I mean these come in bags of 50 and they cost in the area of about 20 pence per miniature. They are ridiculously cheap. And the orcs, being orcs at a 25mm scale, kind of makes them the same size and stature of a hobgoblin at 28mm scale. These models do require quite a bit of love in order to turn into something that you're happy to put onto the battlefield. Now, I went in on a big bag of the orcs. The orcs come with bows, with spears, and with swords. And a mate of mine went in on the dwarfs, and he ended up doing some lovely conversions with his dwarfs and turning them into the start of a Warhammer army. In fact, slight side story, he said, this is brilliant. I can make a whole Warhammer army for 20 quid. And so then he did the whole Warhammer army for 20 quid and then jumped on eBay and started getting all the old lead ones for God knows how much because he absolutely had to have them. And I think the whole project cost him quite a bit more than £20 in the end. But it's the lie we tell ourselves at the start, isn't it? That's what's important with these projects.
The lie I told myself was opening an eBay store and selling my old miniatures was going to allow me to recoup the money that I'd spent. And while I have made some of it back, every penny of that has been spent on these fucking hobgoblins.
Oh, that's it. PayPal money isn't real money. We know this.
Yeah.
So these orc models that I got hold of, I've still got the rest of them still ready to be done at some point. I've only actually done some work on the bowman, and I'll post these images up on the link that we're going to add to this podcast today, so people can follow along as well. They come on what would be best described as like a Hero Quest base. It's not quite square, it's more rectilinear and it's got kind of curved edges to it. And it's an integral base that's stuck to the model's feet. These models have mold lines. Like, they have mold lines for days. These mold lines are thick. You have to really go to town on these bad boys. But once you've removed the mold lines, you do start getting something that approaches a miniature that's usable. Now, I was quite fortunate with my Age of Sigmar army that their basing scheme is these dudes are standing on rocks on top of lava. So when it came to removing them from their integral bases, for me, it was more of a case of taking a pair of clippers to these integral bases and cutting chunks out of them so that they looked like kind of cracked rocks, and then just sticking that on top of a circle base, making it look like the rock on top of the lava sort of thing. My friend who did the dwarfs for his army, he had to go to town with actually carving these models one by one off of their bases so they could be put onto Warhammer Square bases. And it wasn't a quick job. It wasn't a quick job at all.
Yours look ace though. That's really clever how you fixed that.
Oh, cheers, mate. Thank you. Yeah. It wasn't actually that hard a job at all, but it did seem to be quite effective. It was just coming at it with a pair of pliers from lots of different angles, cutting chunks off of it. Now, this plastic isn't as soft as modern day Games Workshop plastic. This is that kind of plastic that's very, very brittle and will shatter. So if I was to do this again, I would have been wearing goggles or something like that, because bits of base were flying at my face as I was doing this that day. Now, as far as converting these orcs into hobgoblins, right? If you aren't fussed about that kind of classic hobgoblin look, you could use these orcs straight out of the box. I mean, if you look at the original hobgoblins from old Warhammer, 1980s Warhammer, they are much more like kind of half orcs or Uruk-hai or something like that by our standards today. And you could probably use those models as is. They had the kind of slightly pig-like nose and the tusked teeth and a kind of flat face that you kind of associate with orcs. But they could be hobgoblins. But I quite wanted them to look like kind of hobgoblins with pointy noses, big ears, and pointy hats, that sort of thing. So I did a little bit of a green stuff job on them, and I am by no stretch of the imagination an expert with green stuff. I think I've probably gone from beginner to intermediate with green stuff, but I'm very, very far off being what I would consider good with green stuff. I can't make a model from scratch, really. I can add bits to models, or I can adapt models slightly. That's kind of where I'm at with this. And it was a case of making their ears and making their noses, and I slightly exaggerated their lips and chins as well to give a bit more of that kind of goblinoid sort of feature. The easiest conversions to do was the hats, because these archer models are wearing kind of like almost like a leather cap, like a cowl sort of thing. It was as simple as just making kind of big pointy blob on top of the hat and kind of smoothing it down. You'll notice if you're looking at the pictures, I made one of them have a kind of third helmet, kind of like a Mongolian style helmet with a little spike in the middle. And there's a reason why I only did that on one of them, because it took bloody ages. And it was right on the edge of what I'm able to do. And then if you look at the next picture, that was then painted up. So I painted them up to match the rest of my army. I avoided using green on any of the green skins in this army, simply because my colour scheme when I painted these dwarfs was already really, really set. And I felt like adding some bright green skin into the mix would kind of throw them out and make them stick out, and not in a particularly good way. So I made their skin tones a more kind of like pallid, sort of greyish skin tone with bits of pinks and stuff in them. But I think in the end they've ended up being. I think they're an acceptable proxy. I mean, what do you guys make of them?
I think they look terrific.
So yeah, from higher top Mount Hobgoblin, which I've installed myself upon, I think yours are absolutely excellent, and I think you've really taken advantage, Oxy, of the Hobgoblin original aesthetic is all about cloth, and it's all about this floppy Scythian peaked hat. And I think you've really rolled with the green stuff, which is good at making shapes like that. I think it's a really inventive approach, and I think it's really paid off because you've obviously done it for an absolute bargain.
Oh, yeah. I mean, how many are there? There was about 10 hobgoblins I think I made in the end. It did take a lot of work, an awful lot of work. It wasn't as easy as getting a model out of the box and painting it. But, I mean, the models represented there, how much did they cost me? That's probably about £1 or £2 worth of models there, plus materials. I mean, that unit of 10's probably cost me less than £5 when you take into account spray paint and paint and green stuff and all that kind of stuff. They were very, very cheap to produce. It is quite telling, however, that I bought enough to make 50 hobgoblins. That was nearly a year and a half ago, and I still only have 10. So that goes to show you how much work went into them, that I haven't kind of jumped at the chance of making any more just yet, because it is a project. It really is a project trying to get those from the state that they arrive. State might not be the right word. State sounds a bit derogatory. And I have taken a pee out of those EM4 models a little bit, but they are what they are. You don't buy a model for 20 pence and expect Forge World quality, do you? You buy a model for 20 pence, and the fact you've got Hero Quest quality, you've done okay there. You really have.
So for the price that you've outlined, I've just been very quickly doing the maths. For the price that you've outlined for your troops, and this is finished troops with the spray paint and the green stuff paid for, right? You would be able to get 240 of those hobgoblins made for the price of that blister pack of 4 archers. So you've made a profit of 236 goblins, which is how I will be judging Michael and Reaver's proposals for how to convert hobgoblins.
Right. Okay. Nice.
Shall I pass the baton to Reaver? Have you worked with greenskins? Have you converted them? What do you think about the hobgoblin issue?
So I actually haven't. So I'm a bit of an outsider here, but it's a topic that I've followed pretty intently, I guess, with interest for quite some time, because it's. I mean, yeah, you mentioned before that they're not directly within the Chaos Dwarf aesthetic, but they're also just something so fundamental that we see on the forum all the time. And there's been so many creative and inventive solutions people have come up with, including Oxy's there above, which I think turned out great. But there's just so many different ways people have approached it, and a lot of it has to do with what you have in your collection or what you have access to easy, and also what time you're working on them, as in what year is it. But cruising the old forum, and I had a fun time kind of going back and seeing what other folks had done, and just kind of revisited some of the ideas that I'd seen flying across over time. A really common use is Skaven. And so there's several different ways I've seen people do it. I myself did a unit of slaves, but I used the clan rats essentially directly. So, and I wrote some lore about that, and might be a controversial choice, but a ton of Skaven fell into my lap, and I wanted to paint them, and had a couple of fun pseudo steampunk ideas to go along with it. So I didn't go through the effort of converting those to hobgoblins, but it's definitely something that's in the future for me eventually. But anyway, so the Skaven actually have a pretty decent amount of potential in different models of the range. One that I believe I've seen Chubb use at times, and several other folks, has been the Plague Monks, which are still available now. And they're fairly clothed and pretty much almost entirely covered by cloth. It's sort of a ragged cloth look, so that kind of leans well, and also covers up a lot of the fur, so you're not necessarily so worried about that, as that would be the main difference when you're talking about getting something from a Skaven to a hobgoblin. But these don't have a whole lot of fur exposed, so that bodes well for that. Their tail is fairly separate and would be easy to cut off, and even if there is any kind of connection there, it's, I think in the Plague Monk's case, is fairly easily remedied. But they tend to have a little bit more of the sneaky git style look to them. They're kind of hunched over. They already come with a bunch of dual wielding daggers, so you can pretty easily lean into that. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the last time I looked, and Oxy's going to eat my lunch on pricing relative to his excellent crack there, but if I were me, which I am, and I were going about making a unit of sneaky gits, I would get the Skaven Start Collecting box. But that for me is very subject to the fact that I want like every single lever, like pulley wheel, like anything that's remotely mechanical, and take it off of all the war machines that come with that. Um, and I could totally see myself repurposing most of that kit in a lot of ways. I've used tons of Skaven bits in and amongst a lot of the stuff that I've worked on. Aside from the kind of wood structure of it, it's very repurposable. But if I'll have to translate pricing here, but to my knowledge, one of those start collecting kits, I could probably get it. I want to say like $65 US, something in that range.
Weaver, I've done the mental maths for you, because if we discount the artillery pieces and we say that they are about half the cash value, then a unit of 20 plague monks for 20 quid is £1 a man, which is a nice round number, because the pestilence start collecting box is about £45 in the UK. So
yeah, that sounds about right. And that gives you a little bit better value, I think, than if you just bought the plague monks kit separately, but I could be wrong there.
No, it does, and that's the joy of start collecting, and why GW's pricing's moved in that direction. But you're still fundamentally talking about having, via that route, about 120 converted slaves over and above having 4. What would you do for head and or face in that situation?
Yes, I mean, I definitely think you'd have to go down some kind of grot, and or now the gloom spike gets range has really taken off, and I'm not fully aware of how all of those kits work. There's certainly been folks who've used more the 40k, I believe, grot heads. I think I've seen those. Some of those have like almost fully cloth wrapped head. Some of them even have the fur brim on a more metal style helm. So there's a lot of different aesthetics there, and I think there's plenty to be repurposed. Those might work for what I'm going to talk about next, actually, but I think there's enough options in a lot of the various goblin ranges. Even Noblars, I think I've seen used.
Yeah, Nobblers was kind of the answer I was waiting for. They are definitely the most popular head source, partly because Nobblers can be had for cheap, and partly because they don't quite look like night goblins or orcs, which puts them in a sweet spot, I think, for a lot of converters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think particularly on the plague monks, where just with the way the plague monk's head is attached, I think those lend pretty well. And then almost in the exact same way that Oxy did with his hats and the slate and subtle convergence he did, I think you could run something very similar and lean into the green stuff there, and you know, kind of make the hat style more in a traditional hobgoblin sense. But yeah, in tandem with some of the larger, say, grot heads, lots of folks have used those on more traditional clan rats, and so clan rats are what I used for my Skaven. Fell into a huge pile of those, but they came in the Island of Blood kit quite some time ago, and so they were available for next to nothing for a very long time. I haven't checked the market in a while. I'm guessing that's probably dried up. But there was a substantial period of time where those were used pretty heavily, since they were available for cheap, being one of those starter kits that gets partsed up and sold on eBay all the time. Most of the clan rats that I have are from that Island of Blood kit, and they're a little bit less flexible, I think, than some of the other clan rats kits. They're more like all integral body and one arm, and then you have the separate arm, which is a weapon that you can swap out and choose whatever. So they're a little bit different in that regard than some of the regular clan rats, but they still have a fair amount of cloth. There's a little bit more exposed, and from when I painted them, like a couple of them have a thigh exposed, or like an upper arm where you see some fur, but they're not necessarily like furred in the forearms or the bottoms of the calves or anything. So there's definitely some work you might need to do there, as opposed to the plague monks, which are a little bit more clothed. But I think that's pretty overcomable. Although now that the Island Blood kit is not as cheap, I don't think that's quite as cost efficient as going with the plague monks relative to that. But there's also the tails, which are, I think they usually curl back and end up interfacing with the cloth again. So you'd have a little bit more work to do there as well. But there's been plenty of folks who've had really creative cracks at hobgoblins using those, and I think they look great. And definitely, a couple of tactics were brought up, and something that I don't think is mentioned enough, but I've seen it on different hobby YouTubes and places where you take the liquid green stuff product and kind of smear it on a cloth, and you can get a pretty good. You're covering up mistakes, you're covering up imperfections, but you're also gaining a texture that looks interesting for a model like this, where you're doing a ton of cloth, but it gives it some grit and some texture to it. And I don't know, have any of you guys ever played around with liquid green stuff for not just like gap filling?
Never touched it.
I've never actually used a product at all. Yeah, never used it.
It's funny because I don't necessarily value it as a gap filler anymore. I feel like it takes me just as long as to fill a gap more manually or in some other way, but using it as a texture has kind of changed the way I've seen that product. I mean, I got one back when it first started because I was interested in it just for cleaning up models, but I'd say like half of that pot was definitely not used for anything related to gap filling or any of that nature. But it's a cool technique, and not sure if you could get something similar by using more of a texture paint. I'm sure Games Workshop has some new solutions for that. So there might be some other ways to go around it, but that's one of the simplest things to just take. And yeah, you don't want to file up or touch up that area you cut off the tail. Just kind of drab a blob of liquid green stuff and smear it over it, and you get a cool texture out of it.
Very cool. Thank you very much. I think those are very much kind of some of the quickest and cleanest routes to converting hobgoblins that I think you're right that we see around the forum quite a lot. I'm obviously, of course, waiting, Reva, for you to find some way of putting them in a pirate outfit and or some kind of mechanical suit, possibly a mechanical pirate suit. But I'm sure you'll find your way to that in your own time.
That's funny because back when we had the nautical golden hat, it wasn't even me, somebody else, and I'm not going to be able to remember it offhand, but somebody actually had some goblins and diver helmets, and it was a fantastic little unit, very characterful, like had a treasure chest lugging around. It was I can't remember who it was, but there's been precedent there, and it's definitely on my radar.
Nice.
I think even when I've been posting some of my steampunk sea creatures, that somebody threw me out the idea that I need to make a steampunk bolt thrower and crew that with some diver helmet goblins, which is something that's been back burner right now. But there's definitely, I mean, I'm not, you aren't the first person to think about that. That's for sure.
You know what? On my project list, there is a Marienburg land ship that I have that I'm going to fit a bunch of classic goblin rather than hobgoblin bolt throwers to, and turn into a Gorka Morka style land ship galleon for my Rebel Grots. I'm not in any way competent to do that, but it is the kind of thing that I think is cool too. So, Michael, I guess in terms of your thinking on hobgoblins, how you feel about them, what you've done in the past, what you might do in the future, maybe especially from your perspective as Mr. 3D printing, what do you think, and what direction have you gone in, if you have?
Okay, so I have thought about this quite long, actually, because, well, my hobgoblins are free, so price points I win, but I'll come back to that.
Infinite hobgoblins! He's broken my calculator!
Let's say the models are free. Printing isn't free, but I'll come to that. So I also wanted to look for if I could find some ranges that I didn't own, that I had to buy, and see if I could work out a price point on that. And I have found some, so I'll share some pictures, which I downloaded just mere seconds ago. So these are some of this guy's range. They're on my mini factory. Don't know if you know this site. Now, there aren't a whole lot of poses. I believe there are 6 or something in that range. They're not the most beautiful goblins I've seen, but they could work pretty well in an army for me. And they're about €3, I think, each, to $2.99 or something. So say you buy 6 of these, that would be €18, and then printing them would be help me check what would cost to print these. 20 cents, 10 cents, something in that.
Yeah, something like that. About 20 pence for me. But yeah,
I think you could print, well, not considering failures and stuff like that, you could probably print between 100 and 200 models with a liter of resin. So calculating that price would be about €35 for the resin and €18 for the models, I suppose. And then you'd have, let's go lowballing, 150 goblins. Though they wouldn't be very unique, so either you have to do some editing virtually while pre-printing, change weapons posing a bit, or have at them afterwards.
These guys would be good for that because they got bare heads.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Very easy weapon swaps as well, looks like.
That's one thing. I haven't found a lot of goblins with headwear that are not free. For some reason, I can only find free ones. But So the next range, similar, but I think they look just a bit more menacing and evil. I really like these.
Oh, wow.
They are beautiful. Same price point, so not much else to say about those, except there are only 3 poses. And, well, I think it would be a bit harder to convert these into a distinct-looking unit of 40 models or something like that. It would be pretty repetitive.
Yeah, you might be right about that, but those are exactly the pirate goblins I'm looking for.
Well, you're welcome.
you found your cabin boy.
Exactly. I only need a couple.
On to the cheapest ones I found, which were, free to download. Actually, I have a set of hobgoblins, and they were for free on Thingiverse for quite some time, but after maybe 2 months after I printed them and put them on the discourse, they were removed by the poster for some reason, by the initial creator, and he hasn't responded on why, because we had a chat before where I even paid him, you can donate some money to the creator for their effort. So I even paid him because I was so happy to find neat looking hobgoblins. And he was like, "Oh, thank you for paying," and he was happy. But for some reason he took it off and he's not responding to chats on Thingiverse. So probably he was asked to do so.
Wow. I love these. I think they are absolutely fantastic.
Also, I love their shields. They're a bit night goblin-y, but I really like I like them. Also, the which Ozymandias said, the Mongolian-looking hats. Well, there they are.
They've taken the aesthetic of the classic Goblin Regiment, right, which had a couple of those hats mixed in for your Wolf Riders, and is just like let them breathe a little bit, added an extra edge to them, made the archers more interesting. God, it's just our luck that they've been taken down, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. If some of us, not telling names, are lucky enough to make to have made backups, but yeah, they're not available for downloads anymore. And it's a shame because I really hoped he would have made a command group for these. I mean, I can do it myself, but it's not the same. He would have probably done a much better job. However, I have found replacements, maybe competitors. I'll send a bit more detailed picture first. There's also a whole lot of unique characters or unique models in these.
Oh, nice.
They look pretty nice. They're not as characterful as the other ones. They look a bit like Smurfs. But
yeah, they've the thing is they've got the Scythian peaked hat, but the peak is too fat. It's not natural fabric, so it looks fake and a bit, in some cases, a bit dong-like.
I just want to paint them blue in white clothes now, though, because I actually love these models. I've been eyeing these up on Thingiverse for a while, but now I have so many ideas about my next Smurf army. Thank you.
But I mean, the thing is, like, if you take these models and you just split the top of the head part off digitally and you print them, you can just green stuff anything on there you want, and it's not a lot of work.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's easy for me saying that because I don't really sculpt, but still, it doesn't seem like a lot of work.
No, absolutely. Well, those are great, because those are just for the benefit of listeners who maybe don't have the advantage of YouTube or anything like that. Really, what we're looking at on Thingiverse here is a set of hobgoblins that are the exact 90s aesthetic. You know, the faces aren't exactly as proportioned as they are, but honestly, this is an execution on, I want classic hobgoblins, where can I get them? Which lots of other artists have gone in their own different direction.
Michael, have you just posted a picture of light goblins painted as Smurfs?
Yes.
Outstanding.
Technically, I think those were just goblins.
They were, yeah, they're old starter edition ones, weren't they?
Yeah, I got a handful of those in an otherwise really crap eBay haul, but that's a story for another day. Well, thank you very much. That was a really fascinating trip through 3D printing world, Michael, and you've lived up to your reputation as the guru of that space. Is there anything else you were going to show us before I just finish it off by looking at a couple of retail ranges?
One thing you haven't mentioned, Michael, 3D printing, hobgoblins, Fabelzel stuff.
Right, of course. I completely forgot those.
Yeah.
The reason I forgot those is because they didn't really fit into my own army, because it's all, modern, grimdark stuff. They are absolutely beautiful and also free. So if you want a more classic-looking hobgoblin or Chaos Dwarf army, definitely check out Fabelzel's miniatures. Absolutely. High praises.
Yeah, and if you want to search for Fabelzel, now we'll try and post links to all the stuff we've discussed on the thread on Discourse. So don't worry, if you're interested in any of the things we've cooed over, we'll try and make as many of the ones that are still up or still available commercially visible as we can. But Fabelzel is Fabelzel, and then you'll find him. That's a very distinctive name straight away. He's got a great Patreon. I'm actually a patron of his, and you could be too. And I guess that brings me then to kind of close things off. What if you are, like me, a talentless hack who doesn't have a 3D printer and is a bit of a Mr. Moneybags? Can you spend your way out of this problem? Assuming that you've exhausted vintage hobgoblins at the price point that you're willing to pursue. And really the two answers on the open market right now, the open legit market for you to consider, are Russian Alternative, who has just recently, following on from their excellent work realizing the redesign of their Chaos Dwarf range, the Dwarves of Fire Canyon, they've moved into hobgoblins. Now, they just call them goblins, and they occupy a kind of middle position between the classic GW gobbo and a proper hobgoblin, but they do have many of the hats, and they do have a slightly more of the height of kind of a human than of a conventional goblin. And they do have a Wolf Rider unit as well. Now, if you know Russian Alternative, which you probably do, you'll know their pricing is somewhere between GW and less. In that a character will usually set you back about $10, which is an appreciable amount in the non-GW miniature space, and a regiment of 5 Wolf Riders will set you back $20. But with Russian Alternative that you're getting really great quality resin and that they're fitting together really well. So I thoroughly recommend that you have a look at those. And then the other thing that I think it's worth taking a look at is, let me just find this tab that I've buried deep in the wilds, is a little site called thebattleforge.co.uk. And the Battleforge is a kind of small scale metal caster who does his own designs. He's got classic, largely 80s style Chaos Dwarfs. No appreciable Mesopotamian motifs, bull centaurs, none of that. But the one thing from the 90s that Battleforge has delivered on is full regiment-sized groups of classic Scythian hat hobgoblins, all in metal, and at a price point of about £2 a man. So you'll pay £40 for a regiment of 20, but what you will get with that regiment is a full command section that you don't have to pay for separately, which I think is a really nice touch. And you can get them with spears, clubs, or stone axes. And they've all got shields as an option that you can include as well. I have a regiment of these guys. I like them quite a lot. The weapons are a bit primitive for my taste, but I think they're underrated. People don't talk about the site enough, and I think he's clearly a passionate guy, and his stuff's well worth a look. And that's the end of the Hobgoblin story.
Nice one. Well, I think it's nice to see that there are options available for people. I mean, certainly an awful lot more options available to people than were when I first started getting into Chaos Dwarfs. When I first started getting into Chaos Dwarfs, back when I was a lowly lurker on the old forum, it really was the Battle of Skull Pass days. And, you know, people on the forum will know what I mean by that. People that aren't yet a part of the forum. When I talk about Battle of Skull Pass days, I'm talking about the days when people would buy the old Goblins versus Dwarfs starter set for Warhammer Fantasy Battles at the time, and they would convert all the Dwarfs into Chaos Dwarfs and convert all the Goblins, the Night Goblins, into Hobgoblins, normally by making those Hobgoblins slightly taller and stuff. But we've come a long way from those days where our options now, and this is something I keep coming back to, our options now as fans of Chaos Dwarfs have never been greater. There are so many options available to us, be it through physical models, converting, or through 3D printing, that we can have the stuff that we want. It's lovely, isn't it?
It's perfect. I mean, you know, the fact that you ask 4 people the same question and you get a completely different answer is just terrific. Also, the fact that there is just, I mean, even by looking at suitable goblins for this discussion specifically, there's so much on these sites. I'm only on my mini factory and I've scrolled past 6 pages of goblins. Well, mostly not suited for hobgoblin use, but still, there's so much out there. It's perfect, and that's only on 3D printing. Then there's alternative model creators like Russian Alternative and stuff like that, which I hadn't seen before, but these are very gorgeous looking models. And then there's the homemade stuff. I mean, it's just, it almost feels like you're being spoiled, even though we're like the least supported army in the history. No, that's not true.
I completely agree with you, Michael. I think the irony of this is, right, that for an unbelievably creative hobby, GW, through their neglect, and I think it's fair to say in some cases through their greed regarding the price point for Legion of Asgore infantry, have induced this market by virtue of having accidentally had this incredible idea in 1993. Rick Priestley gave us this fully realized concept of Mesopotamian dwarfs who are enthralled to a bull god who have green skin slaves, and like one sentence concept, and it has resonated down the decades to the point where all these creatives who were growing up in that period have now turned their hands to addressing it, and the market is still strong.
Absolutely, and the market is, you know, is strong as well, because that's that forced creativity. If I was an Empire fanatic, I wouldn't have spent the last 20 years learning how to sculpt Empire models. If I was a Chaos Dwarf fanatic, there's a chance I have.
I mean, Chubb makes Chaos Dwarfs out of pins. that is the product of neglect by GW that has created something really beautiful.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, on Michael's point too, gonna throw a plug in for future me. Combine all of these things. You take the Russian Alternative Hobgoblins, which, you know, there's 2 different units now. There's archers and then spears and or hand weapon. I think that's what they have now. That's still only 10 models. So if you're looking for a slave unit, it would be awesome to have a 3D printer And like Michael said, he was finding tons of heads. You could potentially just head swap all those Russian alternatives with cool 3D printed heads. Be an interesting amalgamation of taking something 3D printing and purchasing something from one of the ranges that exists. I think that would have a pretty cool aesthetic.
Agreed.
I can't wait to see you guys do it, and I can't wait to pay all of my money for all of these things.
I wonder if at some point, we're going to get a similar situation as we are seeing now with all models being, some of them are getting to the point of being priceless. Will there be a time where, due to some strange happening on the interweb, that some set of old 3D files will be highly coveted or mystified, like, I really need those 3D files?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, physical models are easier to lose over the mists of time than files are, but yeah, the files can be lost. They can be lost. There's a reason why Admiral and a few others had to do such a big job to salvage the files from the old forum, getting them over to the new forum, because even files can be lost with enough time.
Well, especially with a lot of content isn't free. There's like all the Lost Kingdom stuff. It's not free. It's not expensive either, but it's not free. So I can imagine in say 10 years or so, and Lost Kingdom has either moved on or hopefully not, but quit their business and their webshop is down. I can imagine that people would find it difficult to find these models, and especially some rare specific single model or a Kickstarter exclusive of something that might exist somewhere on somebody's computer but not be available on the internet for easy access for all, with easy access to all.
I think what we're hearing here is one of Michael's greatest dreams, in which he has all of the 3D files that everybody wants in the entire world, and he can price them however he so pleases.
Well,
so what you do in that situation, Michael, is you start saying to people that you're a vintage STL broker, and then you just sort of wait for them to figure out what that means in private chat.
Well, if I ever get to that point, I'll definitely talk to you as a master.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So I think that's about that for tonight. We are going to be wrapping this up, but next episode, which is going to be coming out pretty darn soon, is going to be a Golden Hat special. So the Golden Hat competition is still running at the time of recording, but by the time of the next podcast will have been finished, and all of the entrants siege giants will have been produced and put up on the forum, and we're going to go through them one by one, and we're going to be discussing each of those pieces of work. And I'm really excited for this, because it looks like we've had quite a lot of entrants, and it looks like we've had some relatively new people enter, and we've also had some of the old guard coming out of the woodwork to enter theirs as well. So it's going to be good. It's going to be really good. I can already feel the standard's going to be high. So that's what we're going to be focusing on next episode. Also, next episode, we're going to be giving you guys a tiny little preview for what's coming up in the next Brazen Bulletin webzine. Listeners will know that we were lucky enough to secure an interview with Rick Priestley himself. And we're not going to give away the entire interview, but we're going to talk about maybe 2 or 3 of his responses to some of our questions and discuss those on the podcast as well. And hopefully pretty soon after that, you'll start hearing the first rumblings of the new Brazen Bulletin coming out. We've got quite a lot of material for it already, but we're always looking for new material as well. So if you have anything that you would like us to discuss on this podcast, or if you have anything that you would like to contribute to our website, you can send an email to brazenbulletin@gmail.com. That's brazenbulletin@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your feedback. We'd love to hear your ideas. And if you've got articles or photographs or anything that you'd like to see in our magazine, we'd gratefully accept that. And of course, the place where you all need to be is the Chaos Dwarfs online forum. So if you haven't already, please sign up at discourse.chaos-dwarfs.com. brazenbulletin.com, and we'd love to see you on the forum. We're all very active there, as are a lot of the people we've been mentioning. It's an absolute hub of creativity on the internet, and we'd love to see you there. But I think that's just about everything for tonight, gents. So we'll probably say goodbye now, and we will see you all again very soon. All right, see you later, guys. Ta-da. Bye-bye.
Bye.